there will be a system which will be set out in more detail in the white paper, where they would, in the declarations they are already having to make, would set out what portion of that import, so let's say it's 50-50 for argument's sake, is going into the EU and what portion is not, and that will then set the basis for the customs duties that they will pay.
Excellent. So they've submitted that. Still have a system at the moment where 3% of goods, maybe based on intelligence, maybe based on random sampling, you check to make sure that the system is not being abused. Are you saying there are going to be no physical checks at all on these Nike containers? What's to stop this business saying, do you know what, I'm having declared that half of them are going to Liverpool and half of them are going to Dublin. We're now going to send all of them down to Dublin. What's to stop them doing that?
They'll be breaking the law, and also
but checks to make sure that people don't.
It's worth when you discuss this, it's worth keeping in mind. Even today, the current situation today is that we have varying duties on certain products. So alcohol, for example, cigarettes and things within the EU. And so those products, as you know, they flow freely across borders today, but there is a system of checks and based on intelligence and in other ways, both within the UK and with some of our EU partners, on trying to police that system. So you will know that anyone importing, for example, cigarettes today under the current system from Poland, there's a certain duties that they have to pay.
Which is why you have 1% checks on your EU goods and 3% checks on your non-EU goods.
And that's right. And the
my
checks
question
on EU
is,
goods
for all
will
of
continue.
the non-EU goods and for all of the checks, so are you saying that you'll only maintain that much lower level of checks on EU goods, despite the fact that the common external tariff will provide an additional incentive to smuggle?
You will always be following a risk-based system, which is what we follow today on different duties between EU countries on certain products. And that is policed because it can lead to significant loss of revenue, for example, the kind of with alcohol, for example. And it's a risk-based approach, and I think that kind of process will continue. But I still think that under the proposals, there will not be in any way a significant increase in the number of checks that are required across borders with the EU.
You are going to say to all of these importers, okay, you're going to have to fill in these forms to tell us where the goods are going, whether they're going to Liverpool, whether they're going to Dublin. You're going to have to tell us, but we are going to do no physical checks on any of that. How plausible do you think that's going to be to the EU Commission that we've got a robust system that's going to collect their tariffs for them?
Well, I don't think we're saying no physical checks, because as I said, even today, across our borders with the EU, there are checks that take a very limited number of checks. There are some checks that take place, often on all risk-based, often based on intelligence, some sort of random stops, and that is to try and prevent and deter people from trying to take advantage of differing duties that exist today. Okay. So that system that already exists today, in the way that it works, it can be used to work inside this new proposal, but my point is not that there won't be no checks at all, but it will be building on the system that already exists.
So there might be some increase in checks?
There might be some increase in checks, but it won't be...
How will they be done at the Northern Ireland border?
So, but that's today that border is completely free and open, and under our new proposal, it will remain exactly the same way. So
there'll be no additional checks. So for the Nike things coming in, there'll be no additional checks on anything that comes in through Northern Ireland, even if some of it then goes into the Irish Republic and some of it goes to the rest of the UK.
And there won't be, and the reason there won't be is because even today, when checks for those people that might be smuggling goods, for example, by smuggling, I mean trying to avoid duties on those products, like cigarettes, for example. Even today, when we talk about checks, in the case of the Northern Ireland Irish border, they are all done away from the border, and they're done based on typically on intelligence and police work, and that will continue.
Okay, so are you saying then there will be no additional checks on any of these goods coming in through Northern Ireland? There'll be absolutely no additional checks?
There'll be no additional checks.
Okay. And do you accept that being outside the common external tariff and having different tariffs for goods coming in through Northern Ireland or coming in through the Irish Republic does create an incentive to smuggle? It may be against the law, but it does create an incentive to smuggle, especially if there are no checks.
In the same way that there is an incentive today with differing duties.
And you'll be aware that there is obviously concern and that the existing difference in duties does fuel smuggling that also contributes to extremist activity around Northern Ireland. Are you worried that you are creating with this arrangement an incentive to smuggle that actually could end up helping finance some of the dissident and extremist activity?
No, I'm not. And
Have you looked at it?
And I'll tell you one reason, because it's existing smuggling that unfortunately does happen, has gone on for decades, and the successive governments know, despite efforts on both sides of that particular border to try and deal with that, is the incentives that exist there can be quite substantial in terms of differing duties. So the difference in duties, for example, in cigarettes in the UK versus Poland or Hungary, it's huge. It's in the multiples of 100%. It's I don't have the figures top of my head, but the differences are huge. For even with France and the UK, so a much nearer neighbour. On alcohol, the differences are huge. On petrol and other types of fuel, the differences are huge. So that I don't think reasonably anyone would anticipate that big a difference on duties, because if you look at the average WTO tariff today on WTO terms, I think, and please, just on the top of my head, I think it's around 4% on manufactured goods. So the idea that you're going to have these massive, huge differences in tariffs here in the multiples, I don't think is realistic. Notwithstanding, of course, you will have differences in tariffs as we do our own free trade agreements, which will help trade. But the real focus, I think, will remain on the big differences in duties that exist on certain classes of products. And that will, clearly, I think, the cigarettes and alcohol will be leading that.
Do you anticipate difficulties persuading the EU Commission of the credibility of our processes to collect their tariffs if there are no physical checks?
I don't, and part of my confidence comes from what's in the white paper, and I think when you'll see it, you'll share my confidence.
Raymond Chisti.
Thank you, Chair. First question, can I ask you, Sir Philip, is this. You were in play on the 21st of March 2018 when this committee published its report on UK-EU security cooperation. This committee has not had a response from the Home Office since then. Is it because you lost the report? Is it because you don't have time? Or is the matter not important enough for you to respond to the committee in the due time that's required to do so?
I'm aware of the report, of course, and also aware of our duty to respond. I'm sorry that we have not responded to date. I expect that we will respond shortly, though I have to say I do not think it will be before the white paper is published on Thursday.
Can I just ask clarification? Why is it that you haven't responded in the time that you were required to respond?
Your report raises a whole range of issues,
Sure.
Very helpfully so, and considering those issues and how to respond is a matter for both officials and ministers in the department. We have been considering the report very carefully and have not yet reached the point of publishing our response.
Are you able to say, now that you are here before us, which particular areas of that report concern you the most?
No, I'm not. I'm not going to go into detail on the response. The report was very thorough. It covered a whole range of different instruments that exist under cooperation between the EU under law enforcement and national security. It raised a whole range of different issues. I'm not going to pick out any particular issue that has caused us to not to respond yet.
And can I just ask, when roughly do you estimate the committee will get that report? The response to that report?
As I said, I believe that the department should be in a position to respond shortly, but it will. I do not expect it will be before the white paper is published on Thursday.
So, if I may, just add to that as well. First of all, I regret that we haven't responded to your report yet. I think your report is very thorough. I think it provides very valuable scrutiny on what is clearly a very important issue, so I welcome that. And because it raised a lot of good points and things, I want to make sure the response is thorough enough. And one reason it won't come before the white paper is just in the white paper there will be a chapter, there will be information and discussion around security as well, and we can talk a bit about it now if you wish. But hopefully as soon as possible after that we will give a more thorough response to your report. And
just clarification, a couple of questions on the security cooperation and our discussions that we're having and negotiations with our European partners. What is your current assessment in relation to the moving forward on our security cooperation with our European partners post-Brexit?
Well, first it might be helpful just to mention very quickly what we have already said. I've said quite publicly on a number of occasions, that we reiterated in the white paper, is that what we want is a new comprehensive internal security treaty that will cover practically all the sort of areas of cooperation that we have today, the practical international cooperation on things like arrest warrants and multilateral cooperation with agencies such as Europol, and also on data, things like the SIS2 system. So a very comprehensive, broad-ranging treaty that creates that legal framework. In terms of sort of response, as it were, today, it really depends who you're speaking to at the EU. As you will no doubt be familiar with many different parts of the EU, the response from the Commission so far, which as you know have been leading, at least publicly, their negotiations, has been not very good, in the sense that it's been sort of very much down the line of, when you leave you will be a third country, and of course we want to work with you on security, but you will have to cooperate in the same way as any other third country works with the EU today, which is from our point of view completely does not want this kind of comprehensive approach, and the idea of having this treaty, which we will negotiate in more detail during the implementation period as well, you said to make it active during that period, has been very warmly welcomed by interior ministers. So I think you see this difference between the Commission's response and governments, much more positive response from governments within the EU.
I know what you say about a comprehensive treaty, and also the comments you made previously that the EU should not be reckless and wrong in relation to when dealing with security and cooperation between our countries. You've got the dilemma between the interior ministers saying one thing to you, and you've got the Commission on the other hand, which saying you cannot have a separate arrangement in relation to the arrest warrant and in relation to the data, access to the database. So with the difference of opinion with the Commission and the interior ministers, what is the likelihood of getting that new comprehensive treaty?
I feel very positive about it, because I'm not surprised by the Commission's reaction in one respect, in that even with the non-security issues, the Commission has taken a view that the UK will become a third country, so therefore you need to work with us on that basis. And when it comes to security, so I'm not surprised, first of all, the reaction, but when it comes to security, given that what we have proposed is completely unconditional, in the sense that we are rightly not linking it to other things that we discussed today. We discussed immigration, we discussed borders, we discussed trade. We see this as something that's quite separate, and we are not making any link with that. We're saying it's completely unconditional offer. Security is something that shouldn't be linked to any of the other discussions. It is clearly in the mutual interest of the UK and our EU friends. And I think for that reason it is why we've made good progress with the respective governments of the member countries, and it fills me with confidence, and the more I discuss it with them, the more positive the reaction has become. We've seen some ministers in countries, for example, the Interior Minister in Germany, just recently being much more positive publicly about it as well, which